Dongmin ran through the metal halls of Nexus Prime Educational Complex. His boots made loud sounds on the shiny floor. He was late again. This was becoming a bad habit since he started at the galaxy's most famous school 3 weeks ago. The hallways were huge and filled with students from different planets. A tall blue girl with 4 arms walked past him. Her skin looked like it was made of water. Behind her, a small creature that looked like a floating cloud of gas moved slowly along the wall. Its colors kept changing from purple to green. Dongmin had never seen so many different types of beings in one place. Back on Earth, everyone looked mostly the same. Here at Nexus Prime, every day brought new surprises. Some students breathed different air and wore special masks. Others needed special lights or had to stay in temperature-controlled suits. He reached the door to advanced xenobotany class and stopped to catch his breath. Through the small window, he could see the classroom was already full. Professor Veltar stood at the front, and their crystal body was glowing with a soft white light. That meant the professor was in a good mood. Dongmin had learned to read the crystal professor's colors during his first week. The classroom was built like a theater with rows of seats going up toward the back. Students from dozens of different worlds sat in the seats. Some were taking notes on floating screens. Others used devices that Dongmin had never seen before. He opened the door as quietly as he could and slipped inside. A few students turned to look at him, but most were focused on the professor. Dongmin climbed the steps to find an empty seat in the back row. He was good at being invisible when he needed to be. As he sat down, Dongmin reached into his bag and pulled out his lunch. He had been in such a hurry that morning that he forgot to eat breakfast. His stomach was making hungry sounds, and he hoped no one could hear them. His lunch was simple today. He had packed a sandwich made with bread from the Earth food section of the Academy cafeteria. The bread cost more than he wanted to spend, but it reminded him of home. He also had an apple that he had grown himself in the Academy's special greenhouse where Earth plants could live. The apple was perfect, red and shiny with a sweet smell. Dongmin had been taking care of the apple tree for 2 months now. The greenhouse workers had been surprised that a student wanted to grow simple Earth plants when they could grow exotic flowers from other worlds. But Dongmin missed the foods from home. He looked around the classroom while holding his apple. In the row in front of him sat Hei-Wan, a student from the Andromeda Galaxy. Her skin was blue and seemed to glow from inside. She was always the smartest student in every class and asked the most questions. Her notes were always perfect and organized. To his left sat Tae-Hyun, who had 6 arms and came from the Rigel system. All 6 of his arms moved at the same time when he took notes. It was amazing to watch. He could write, draw pictures, use his computer, and hold his books all at the same time. Dongmin sometimes felt jealous of having so many arms. Near the front of the class, So-Young floated in a special chair. She was made of gas and looked like a small cloud with colors that changed based on her feelings. Right now she was a calm blue color, which meant she was paying attention to the lesson. Professor Veltar's crystal body began to change colors. The white light became brighter, which meant something important was about to happen. The professor's voice came from speakers around the room because crystal beings did not have mouths like humans. Students, today we begin a very special lesson series, Professor Veltar announced. We will study the most dangerous plants in our galaxy. Some of these plants can kill with just a touch. Others can poison the air around them. And some are so deadly that even looking at them can be harmful. Dongmin took a small bite of his apple while listening. The apple was crisp and sweet. It tasted like the apples his grandmother used to grow in her garden back on Earth. He smiled at the memory and took another bite. The lights in the classroom began to dim. Professor Veltar was preparing to show pictures and videos on the big screen at the front of the room. Students around Dongmin sat up straighter in their seats. This was always the most interesting part of any xenobotany class. But first, the professor continued, let me remind you all of the safety rules. If you see any of these plants in real life, do not touch them. Do not smell them. Do not go near them. Some of these plants have killed entire research teams. Dongmin chewed his apple quietly and pulled out his notebook. He should probably take notes even though he was eating. The professors at Nexus Prime expected students to work hard. This was not like his old school on Earth where he could sleep in the back of the class. Around him, students were getting ready for the lesson. Some put on special glasses that would help them see the holograms better. Others activated recording devices to save the lesson for later study. The 6-armed student in front of him was already writing notes even though the lesson had not really started yet. The apple was almost half gone now. Dongmin ate slowly and tried to be quiet. He did not want to disturb the other students. The classroom was getting darker as Professor Veltar prepared the first hologram. Today we will see plants that have ended civilizations, the professor said. Plants that grow on worlds where no other life can survive. Plants that have evolved to kill anything that comes near them. Dongmin finished the last bite of his apple and put the core in his bag. He would throw it away after class. He opened his notebook and got ready to learn about dangerous plants from across the galaxy. It sounded like it would be an interesting lesson. The first hologram appeared in the air above the students' heads. It showed a beautiful flower with purple petals that seemed to glow. Students gasped in surprise at how pretty it looked. "This," said Professor Veltar, "is where our journey into botanical terror begins." Professor Veltar's crystal body glowed brighter as the first hologram spun slowly in the air. The purple flower looked beautiful and harmless. Its petals moved gently as if there was a soft wind blowing on them. "This lovely flower is called the Venusian dream blossom," the professor explained. "It looks peaceful, but it releases a gas that can make you sleep forever. Entire exploration teams have been found lying next to these flowers, smiling as if they were having wonderful dreams." Students in the classroom made small sounds of fear and surprise. HFY wrote quickly in her notebook. Her blue skin got a little darker, which Dongmin had learned meant she was nervous. Taehyun's 6 arms all moved at once as he drew a detailed picture of the flower. So Young's gas cloud body turned from blue to yellow. Dongmin was still learning what all the colors meant for her species, but yellow seemed to mean she was worried or scared. The hologram changed to show a different plant. This one looked like a vine covered in sharp thorns. The thorns were moving and reaching out like they were trying to grab something. "The Martian thorn strangler," Professor Veltar continued. "These vines can grow 50 feet long in just one day. They hunt small animals and wrap around them with their thorns. The thorns inject a poison that turns the victim into plant food." More gasps came from the students. A few students in the front rows moved back in their seats even though the plant was just a hologram. Dongmin found it interesting but not too scary. He had seen worse things in old horror movies back on Earth. He was getting hungry again. The apple had been good, but his stomach was still making quiet sounds. He reached into his bag and found the sandwich he had made that morning. It was just simple bread with some cheese and vegetables from the Earth section of the cafeteria. The lesson continued with more plants. Professor Veltar showed them the European ice vine that could freeze an entire room in seconds. Then came the Titan moss that could eat through metal walls. Each plant was more dangerous than the last. Students were taking notes as fast as they could. Some were recording everything with their devices. The classroom was completely quiet except for the professor's voice and the sound of students writing. "These plants are dangerous," Professor Veltar said, "but they are nothing compared to what we will see next." The professor's crystal body began to change color. The white light became red, then purple, then a dark orange. Students who knew how to read crystal emotions became very nervous. HFY stopped writing and stared at the professor. Taehyun's 6 arms all stopped moving at the same time. "What I'm about to show you," the professor continued, "is the most terrifying plant in our galactic database. It comes from a world so dangerous that most species cannot even visit it. This plant has killed more beings than any war in galactic history." The classroom became completely silent. Even the normal sounds of breathing apparatus and environmental suits seemed to get quieter. Every student was focused on the professor and waiting to see this terrible plant. Dongmin took a bite of his sandwich and looked up at where the next hologram would appear. He was curious to see what could be more dangerous than plants that could freeze rooms or eat through metal. "This plant is so deadly," Professor Veltar said slowly, "that just one bite can dissolve your internal organs. The poison in its seeds is strong enough to kill a Rigelian battle beast. Even touching it can cause severe chemical burns." Students were leaning forward in their seats. Some were holding their breath. HFY's blue skin had turned almost white with fear. So Young had changed to a sickly green color that Dongmin had never seen before. "The beings who live on the same world as this plant call it by an innocent name," the professor continued. "But we know better. We call it what it really is." The hologram appeared above their heads. It was a perfect red sphere with smooth skin that reflected the classroom lights. It had a small green stem on top and looked almost like it was glowing from inside. Dongmin nearly choked on his sandwich. He knew exactly what he was looking at. He had been eating them his whole life. Behold, Professor Veltar announced in a dramatic voice, the death fruit of Earth. The apple hologram rotated slowly so all students could see it from every angle. Professor Veltar began pointing out different parts of the fruit with a laser pointer. Notice the deceptive beauty, the professor said. The bright red color is meant to attract victims. The smooth surface hides deadly toxins just beneath the skin, and this green growth on top releases poisonous gases when the fruit is damaged. Students were writing furiously. Some were drawing detailed pictures. Others were recording everything with their cameras. The fear in the room was so thick that Dongmin could almost feel it. The death fruit contains multiple types of poison, Professor Veltar continued. The skin has chemicals that can burn through most organic materials. The flesh inside is full of acids that destroy living tissue, and the seeds in the center contain enough toxin to kill dozens of large creatures. Heywan raised one of her hands. Professor, how do the beings on Earth survive with such dangerous plants growing there? Professor Veltar's crystal body flashed bright red with excitement. Excellent question. The world called Earth is what we call a death world. It is so hostile that only the most dangerous creatures can live there. The dominant species there has evolved to survive around plants like this death fruit. But surely even they do not eat it, said a student from near the front. Of course not, Professor Veltar replied. No intelligent being would be foolish enough to consume a death fruit. Even the tough creatures of Earth know to avoid it. Dongmin looked down at his sandwich, and then up at the hologram of the apple. He tried not to laugh. Back home, his little sister ate apples every day with her lunch. His grandmother made apple pies that the whole family loved. Apple juice was one of the most popular drinks for children. The death fruit is so dangerous, Professor Veltar went on, that our research teams can only study it using robots. Even our strongest protective suits cannot keep us safe from its toxins. Students were asking more questions now. They wanted to know how big the death fruit trees were, how many of them grew on Earth, and whether the Earth creatures had any natural defenses against them. Dongmin finished his sandwich and listened to the professor describe apples like they were weapons of mass destruction. He had never thought about how strange Earth foods might seem to aliens. To him, an apple was just a healthy snack. To these students, it was a nightmare. In our next lesson, Professor Veltar announced, we will study the other deadly plants of Earth. There are hundreds of them, each more terrifying than the last. The class was almost over. Students were packing up their notes and getting ready to leave. They all looked worried and scared after learning about the death fruit. Dongmin reached into his bag and pulled out a second apple. He had packed 2 for today because the first one had been so good. Dongmin looked at the second apple in his hand. It was just as red and perfect as the first one. He could smell its sweet scent even through the classroom air that was filled with different breathing gases and environmental controls. Professor Veltar was still talking about the terrible dangers of the death fruit. The crystal, Professor's body kept changing colors as they described how the fruit's poison could kill in different, horrible ways. The acidic compounds in the death fruit, the professor explained, can eat through metal in just minutes. Imagine what it would do to living tissue. Students were still taking notes and asking questions. Everyone was completely focused on the lesson about Earth's most dangerous plant. No one was paying attention to the back of the classroom where Dongmin sat quietly. He was getting hungry again. The sandwich had been good, but not very filling. The apple in his hand looked delicious. He had grown it himself with careful attention to watering and sunlight. It had taken months to get perfect. Dongmin raised the apple to his mouth and took a big bite. The sound was louder than he expected. The apple was so crisp that it made a clear crunching noise that seemed to echo in the quiet classroom. A few students near him turned around to see what had made the sound. Dongmin smiled at them and chewed quietly. The apple was even better than the first one. Sweet and juicy with just the right amount of firmness. Professor Veltar continued the lesson without noticing anything unusual. The toxins in the death fruit are so strong that even our most advanced medical treatments cannot help someone who has been poisoned by it. Dongmin took another bite. This time he tried to be quieter, but the apple was so crisp that it was impossible to eat silently. More students looked back at him. Some of them seemed confused about what they were seeing. Heywan was in the row in front of him, still taking careful notes. She was the best student in the class and never missed anything important. Her blue skin was still pale from fear after learning about the death fruit. The smell of the death fruit, Professor Veltar said, is designed to attract victims. It releases chemicals that make other creatures want to eat it. This is how the plant spreads its deadly seeds. Dongmin paused with the apple halfway to his mouth. That was an interesting way to think about apple scent. He had always just thought apples smelled good because they were food. He took another bite and thought about how different the same thing could look from different points of view. A student with tentacles instead of arms raised one tentacle to ask a question. Professor, what happens if someone actually eats the death fruit? Professor Veltar's crystal body flashed bright red with excitement and fear. Death would be quick but extremely painful. First, the acids would burn through the mouth and throat. Then the poison would attack the nervous system. Finally, the toxins would shut down all internal organs. Students made sounds of horror and disgust. Some covered their mouths with their hands or tentacles or whatever they used for hands. The description was so terrible that even Dongmin felt a little sick, and he was eating an apple while listening to it. How long would it take? Asked another student. Minutes, Professor Veltar replied. Maybe seconds for smaller species. The death fruit is one of the most efficient killing plants in the galaxy. Dongmin finished his apple down to the core. He always ate apples completely except for the seeds and stem. His grandmother had taught him not to waste food. He looked around for somewhere to throw away the core. Haewon turned around at that exact moment. She wanted to borrow a stylus because her note-taking device had stopped working. Her large eyes looked directly at Dongmin just as he was holding the apple core in his hand. For a second, she did not understand what she was seeing. Her brain could not process the information. The death fruit core looked exactly like the hologram that Professor Veltar had been showing them. Red skin with some brown spots where it had been bitten, a green stem on top. Seeds visible inside where the flesh had been eaten away. But that was impossible. No one could eat a death fruit and still be alive. No one could bite through the acidic skin without their mouth being burned. No one could swallow the toxic flesh without dying instantly. Haewon looked at Dongmin's face. He was smiling at her in a friendly way. His mouth was not burned. His skin was not melting. He looked completely healthy and normal. She looked back at the apple core in his hand. Then she looked at his mouth again. There was a small piece of apple skin stuck between his teeth. The understanding hit her like a physical blow. The human student sitting behind her had just eaten an entire death fruit, while their professor explained how deadly it was. He had consumed the most poisonous plant in the galaxy like it was a normal snack. Haewon's scream filled the entire classroom. It was not a small sound of surprise. It was a loud, terrified scream that came from deep in her chest. Her blue skin flashed through every color she was capable of making. Bright white from shock, deep red from fear, purple from confusion. Every student in the classroom turned to look at her. Professor Veltar stopped talking and spun around to see what was wrong. The crystal professor's body went completely clear, which meant total surprise and confusion. Death fruit, Haewon shouted while pointing at Dongmin with a shaking finger. He's eating the death fruit! All eyes in the classroom turned to look at Dongmin. He was still holding the apple core and had stopped smiling. He looked around at all the staring faces and realized that something was very wrong. He ate it. Haewon continued screaming. The human ate a whole death fruit. The classroom exploded into chaos. Students who understood what Haewon was saying began screaming too. Others jumped up from their seats and tried to run toward the exits. Some students fainted from shock. Taehyun's 6 arms all went limp at the same time and he fell backward in his chair. The sound of his body hitting the floor was loud in the screaming classroom. So Young's gas cloud body suddenly expanded to 3 times its normal size. The sudden change in pressure triggered emergency alarms in the ventilation system. Red lights began flashing and a loud warning sound filled the room. Students with environmental suits activated emergency protocols. Those who breathed different air put on backup breathing masks. Some students who needed special temperatures ran toward climate-controlled emergency areas. Professor Veltar's crystal body was cycling through every color in the spectrum. Red for danger, purple for fear, orange for confusion, yellow for emergency. The professor had never seen anything like this in decades of teaching. Evacuation Protocol 7, Professor Veltar announced through the speakers. The professor's voice was loud and full of panic. Biological hazard. Clear the classroom immediately. Students were climbing over desks and pushing past each other to get to the exits. Some were crying. Others were shouting warnings to friends. The orderly classroom had become complete chaos in just a few seconds. In the middle of all the screaming and running, Dongmin sat quietly in his seat. He still held the apple core in his hand and tried to understand what was happening. He said quietly, but no one could hear him over the noise. It's just an apple? But his voice was lost in the chaos. Students continued to run and scream. Alarms continued to ring. And Professor Veltar continued. To call for emergency medical teams, Dongmin looked down at the apple core in his hand and then up at the hologram of the death fruit that was still spinning slowly above the classroom. They looked exactly the same. The emergency medical team arrived in less than 5 minutes. They came running through the hallways of Nexus Prime, with their equipment floating behind them on anti-gravity platforms. Their footsteps and the sound of medical devices filled the corridor outside the classroom. Dr. Kangdae led the team. He was a Centaurian who had cybernetic parts added to his body to help him work better as a doctor. His left eye was replaced with a medical scanner that could see inside patients. His right arm had built-in tools for emergency surgery. Behind him came Nurse Jiwoo, a scion who could read thoughts and emotions. Her job was to monitor patients' mental states during medical emergencies. Her pale skin and large black eyes made her look fragile, but she was one of the best medical minds in the galaxy. The rest of the team included specialists from different worlds. Each one was an expert in treating poisoning from dangerous plants. They had seen victims of the Venusian dream blossom and survivors of Titan moss attacks. But none of them had ever treated someone who had eaten a death fruit. They wore full protective suits that covered their entire bodies. The suits had their own air supply and were designed to protect against the most dangerous biological hazards. Their helmets had face shields that could display medical information and communicate with their equipment. When they entered the classroom, they found it almost empty. Only Dongmin remained, sitting quietly in the back row. He had put the apple core in his bag and was reading a textbook while waiting for someone to tell him what to do. Professor Veltar stood near the front of the room but far away from Dongmin. The crystal professor's body was flashing between different colors of worry and confusion. When the medical team arrived, the professor's relief was visible as a bright yellow glow. There, Professor Veltar said, pointing at Dongmin. The human student. He consumed an entire death fruit approximately 8 minutes ago. He should be dead by now, but he appears to be fine. Dr. Kangdae activated his scanner eye and looked at Dongmin from across the room. The scanner could detect toxins, cellular damage, and signs of poisoning from a distance. What he saw made no sense. Patient appears to be in perfect health, Dr. Kangdae announced to his team. No signs of distress. Normal heart rate. Normal breathing. No cellular damage visible. Nurse Jiwoo focused her telepathic abilities on Dongmin to read his mental state. People who were dying from poison usually had specific thought patterns. Fear, pain, confusion, and desperation were common. What she found in Dongmin's mind was completely different. His thoughts are normal, she reported. He's confused about why everyone is worried. He's thinking about his homework for tomorrow's engineering class. The medical team looked at each other with confusion. Dr. Kangdae had treated thousands of poisoning cases. He knew what death fruit poisoning should look like. The victim should be unconscious or dead by now. Maybe he did not actually eat it, suggested one of the other doctors. Maybe he was just holding it. Professor Veltar's crystal body flashed red with disagreement. Multiple students witnessed him consuming the entire fruit. Student Haewon saw him bite and chew and swallow. Dr. Kangdae moved closer to Dongmin, but kept his distance in case the human was contaminated with death fruit toxins. His scanner eye focused on Dongmin's mouth and throat area. I can see plant material between his teeth, the doctor reported. Red fruit skin consistent with death fruit. Cellular analysis shows apple flesh in his digestive system. Dongmin looked up from his textbook when he realized the doctors were talking about him. Excuse me, he said politely. Is something wrong? Everyone seemed really upset, but I do not understand why. The medical team stepped back when he spoke. They could smell the apple on his breath, sweet and fruity, exactly like the death fruit samples they had studied in medical school. You ate a death fruit, Dr. Kangdae said carefully. How do you feel? Dongmin thought about the question. I feel fine, a little hungry still. The apple was good, but not very big. Why? Should I feel sick? Nurse Jiwoo read his thoughts again. He's telling the truth. He feels completely normal. He's actually wondering if there's anywhere to get another apple because he liked the taste. Dr. Kang Dae activated more medical scanners. He checked for nerve damage, organ failure, blood toxicity, and cellular breakdown. Every test came back normal. Better than normal, actually. Dongmin appeared to be in excellent health. "This is impossible," said one of the medical specialists. "Death fruit poisoning should kill most species in under 10 minutes. Larger species might last 20 minutes at most. Maybe humans have some natural resistance," suggested another doctor. Dr. Kang Dae ran more detailed scans. He looked at Dongmin's blood chemistry, his digestive system, and his cellular structure. What he found was even more confusing. His digestive system is processing the death fruit normally, the doctor reported. It's breaking down the fruit tissues and absorbing nutrients. There's no sign that his body recognizes the plant as toxic. Professor Veltar moved closer but still kept a safe distance. "Perhaps the death fruit on Earth is different from the samples we have studied. Maybe it evolved to be less dangerous." Dongmin reached into his bag and pulled out a second apple. The medical team immediately stepped back and raised their protective shields. "Wait," Dr. Kang Dae said. "You have another one?" "I brought 2 for lunch today," Dongmin explained. "The first one was really good. I grew them myself in the earth plant greenhouse. Would you like to see it?" He held up the apple so they could all see it clearly. It looked exactly like the death fruit in their medical databases. Red skin, green stem, perfect spherical shape. Even the smell was the same. "Do not eat that, Doctor," Kang Dae said quickly. "We need to run more tests first." "But I ate 3 of them yesterday," Dongmin said, "and 2 the day before that. I have been eating apples my whole life. My grandmother grows them in her garden back on Earth." The medical team looked at each other with shock. If Dongmin was telling the truth, he had consumed multiple death fruits over several days. He should have died from the first bite. Nurse Jiwoo read his thoughts again to make sure he was not lying or confused. He's remembering eating apples as a child. Apple pie with his family. Apple juice at school. He has consumed hundreds of death fruits in his lifetime. Dr. Kang Dae activated emergency communication with the Academy's main medical center. "We need a full research team here immediately. We have a human who appears to be immune to death fruit poisoning." "Immune is not the right word," said one of the specialists who was studying the scanner readings. "His body is not fighting off the toxins. It's processing them as if they were normal food. That means either our research about death fruits is completely wrong," Dr. Kang Dae said slowly, "or humans evolved on a world so dangerous that they can eat poison as a snack." Professor Veltar's crystal body went completely white with shock. The second possibility was more terrifying than the first. If death fruits were normal food on Earth, what other supposedly deadly things did humans consider harmless? "Student Dongmin," the professor asked carefully, "what other foods do you eat regularly?" Dongmin thought about it. "Let me see. Chocolate, coffee, spicy peppers, onions, garlic, tomatoes, potatoes." With each food he mentioned, the medical team's instruments detected compounds that were toxic to most galactic species. Dr. Kang Dae's scanner eye was flashing warning signals about dangerous chemicals. "All of those foods contain substances that are poisonous to most life forms," Dr. Kang Dae said quietly. Dongmin looked confused. "Really? But they are just normal foods. Even children eat them on Earth." The medical team realized they were not dealing with a poisoning case. They were discovering that humans came from a world so hostile that its inhabitants had evolved to eat things that would kill most other species in the galaxy. It was not that Dongmin was immune to poison. It was that what the galaxy considered deadly poison, Earth considered lunch. Within 6 hours, scientists from across the galaxy were gathering at Nexus Prime. They came through space gates and teleportation devices from the furthest corners of known space. The news had spread quickly through the galactic scientific community. A human had eaten a death fruit and lived. The emergency meeting was held in the Academy's largest conference room. Holographic projectors allowed scientists who could not travel to attend virtually. The room filled with beings from hundreds of different worlds. each one an expert in biology, toxicology, or evolutionary science. Dr. Sung Ho, the Academy's head of evolutionary studies, stood at the front of the room. He was a tall, thin human who had been studying alien life forms for 20 years. Today, he was about to present research about his own species that shocked even him. Fellow scientists, Dr. Sung Ho began, what we discovered today changes everything we thought we knew about the world called Earth. On the big screen behind him, images of Earth appeared. Beautiful blue oceans, green forests, and white clouds. It looked peaceful and welcoming. Many scientists in the room had seen these pictures before and thought Earth seemed like a nice place to visit. Earth appears to be a garden world, Dr. Sung Ho continued, but this appearance is deceiving. Earth is actually one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. The screen changed to show Dong Min sitting in a laboratory. He was eating an apple while connected to dozens of medical monitoring devices. Scientists had been watching him eat death fruits for hours, and he remained perfectly healthy. The dominant species on Earth, humans, did not evolve to avoid dangerous plants. Dr. Sung Ho explained. They evolved to eat them. Gasps and sounds of surprise came from around the room. A scientist from the Vega system raised a tentacle to ask a question. Dr. Sung Ho, are you suggesting that humans are somehow immune to plant toxins? Not immune, Dr. Sung Ho replied. Adapted. Let me show you what we discovered when we analyzed human biology. The screen showed detailed scans of Dong Min's digestive system. Colorful charts and graphs displayed information about how his body processed the apple he had eaten. Humans have digestive systems that can break down compounds that would kill most other species. Dr. Sung Ho continued. Their stomachs produce acid strong enough to neutralize many plant toxins. Their livers can process chemicals that would shut down the organs of other life forms. A crystal scientist similar to Professor Veltar flashed bright red with confusion. But how is this possible? Evolution does not usually favor eating poison, Dr. Sung Ho smiled. That is the fascinating part. On Earth, eating these toxic plants was not a choice. It was necessary for survival. The screen changed to show Earth's history. Images of ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and mass extinctions filled the display. Earth has experienced multiple extinction events, Dr. Sung Ho explained. Times when most plant and animal life died. The species that survived were those that could eat anything available, including plants that other animals could not touch. Scientists in the room were taking notes as fast as they could. This information would change textbooks across the galaxy. Humans did not just survive these disasters, Dr. Sung Ho continued. They thrived. They learned to cultivate the toxic plants and turn them into food sources. The screen showed images of human farms growing apples, tomatoes, potatoes, and other crops. To the alien scientists, it looked like humans were deliberately growing poison gardens. Every major food crop on Earth contains compounds that are toxic to most galactic species, Dr. Sung Ho announced. Humans have been eating poison for thousands of years and calling it agriculture. A gaseous scientist near the back of the room changed colors to show extreme confusion. Dr. Sung Ho, what other foods do humans consider normal? Dr. Sung Ho activated a new presentation. The screen filled with images of chocolate, coffee beans, chili peppers, and other common Earth foods. Next to each image was a list of the toxic compounds it contained. Chocolate contains theobromine, which can cause heart failure in most species. Coffee contains caffeine, a powerful neurotoxin. Chili peppers contain capsaicin, which is used as a weapon on some worlds. With each food Dr. Sung Ho mentioned, the scientists in the room became more amazed and horrified. A world where the dominant species ate weapons-grade chemicals for breakfast seemed impossible. But the most shocking discovery, Dr. Sung Ho said, is that humans do not consider these foods dangerous. They give them to their children. The room became completely silent. The idea of feeding poison to young ones went against every biological instinct that most species had. Human children drink caffeine in soft drinks. They eat chocolate candy. They consume what we call death fruits in their school lunches. Dr. Sung Ho pressed a button, and the screen showed Dong Min's medical records. From his childhood on Earth, every yearly checkup showed him in perfect health despite consuming dozens of different toxic compounds regularly. This explains why humans were able to become a spacefaring species, Dr. Sung Ho concluded. They come from a world so hostile that they had to become extremely adaptable to survive. Professor Veltar, who had been watching from the front row, flashed a question pattern with their crystal body. Dr. Sung-ho, does this mean that Earth is more dangerous than we classified it? Much more dangerous, Dr. Sung-ho replied. We classified Earth as a garden world because it looks beautiful. But it should be classified as a death world, possibly the most dangerous death world we have discovered. Scientists around the room were discussing this revelation with excitement and fear, a world that looked like paradise but was actually more deadly than planets covered in lava, or acid rain was a terrifying discovery. We recommend that all galactic species avoid visiting Earth until we can develop better protective equipment, Dr. Sung-ho announced. The air itself contains pollen and spores that could be harmful. The water has minerals that most species cannot process, and the food will kill anyone except humans. At that moment, Dong-min entered the conference room. He had been invited to answer questions from the scientists. He carried a lunch tray with several items from the Earth section of the cafeteria. The scientists watched in fascination and horror as he sat down and began eating. An apple, a chocolate bar, a cup of coffee, and a sandwich with tomatoes and onions. Each item on his tray was a deadly poison to most of the beings in the room. Do you have any questions for me? Dong-min asked politely between bites of his apple. A scientist from the Arcturus system spoke up. Young human, are you aware that you are consuming multiple deadly toxins? Dong-min looked down at his lunch and then back at the scientist. This is just normal food. I have been eating things like this my whole life. So has everyone else on Earth. And you feel no ill effects? Asked another scientist. I feel fine, Dong-min replied. Actually, I feel good. The apple is really sweet today, and the coffee helps me stay awake for afternoon classes. The scientists exchanged looks of amazement. Here was a being who was casually consuming what they considered chemical weapons and describing them as tasty and helpful. Dr. Sung-ho stepped forward. Dong-min, would you be willing to help us study human biology? Your cooperation could help us understand how life adapts to extreme environments. Dong-min finished his apple and smiled. Sure, that sounds interesting. Can I bring my lunch to the study sessions? The scientists agreed, even though watching him eat was both fascinating and terrifying. 6 months later, Dong-min had become the most famous student at Nexus Prime. His xenobotany class was now taught by both him and Professor Veltar. Students came from across the galaxy to learn about Earth's impossible plants and the species that evolved to eat them. Hye-won, who had first discovered Dong-min eating the apple, became his lab partner. She was writing her graduate thesis on adaptive toxin, tolerance in death world species. She had overcome her fear and now found human biology fascinating rather than terrifying. Tae-hyun started a support group for students who had been traumatized by the apple incident. It met every week and served Earth-safe snacks. So Young attended every session and changed to happy orange colors. Whenever she saw Dong-min eating his lunch, Professor Veltar updated all the xenobotany textbooks to include new information about Earth plants. The death fruit was reclassified as extremely dangerous to all species except humans and became a symbol of how different species could view the same thing in completely different ways. The story spread throughout the galaxy. Earth went from being an unknown garden world to being famous as the most dangerous planet where anything could live. Other species looked at humans with new respect and a healthy amount of fear. Dong-min just continued eating his lunch and going to classes. To him, the whole thing was interesting but not really surprising. Earth was his home and the foods there were just normal. He was happy to help other species understand his world, even if they thought it was terrifying. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. One being's poison was another being's picnic. And sometimes the most dangerous worlds could produce the most adaptable species. In his final report, Dr. Sung-ho wrote, "Today we learned that the universe is stranger and more wonderful than our textbooks could ever capture. We also learned never to assume we understand a species until we see what they eat for lunch.